Hello everyone, welcome back to another Hunter x Hunter chapter review. Today we'll be talking about chapter 410, Negotiation Part 4. As I'm sure everyone knows by now, we are back on hiatus after this chapter. There's some hope that it wouldn't happen, but I do think it was more likely than not. And we'll talk about the hiatus later though, because I think it's easy to kind of freak out and go, well, we're at the hiatus already, let's kind of tune out. But this is a great chapter, and I think diving into what is worth the time. So the chapter picks up where we left off, which surprised me a little bit. I thought we wouldn't find out about Borksen's decision until a few chapters later. But no, Borksen does affirm she'll join Morena, though her interior monologue seems conflicted. Morena reveals what a lot of people predicted, that Borksen cheated by marking the return card and then crumpling it up. And Morena did have an anti-cheat kind of put into her ability that forced Borksen to say yes or no if she cheated. Borksen chose to say yes voluntarily to spare herself, but she couldn't choose X like her original plan was to choose X, and she was kind of cut away from that. So Marina explains her ability. We know that we now find out that she can track the members of her group or those who are infected by her. And we also find out that members of the Haley can fight each other, though it's not encouraged. From what we've seen so far, the Haley mostly gets along. We haven't seen them really having any form of we've never seen them attempting violence against one another, though of course it could be a setting up for Borksen potentially fighting back, or of course as Marina applies, the Haley killing Borksen to get a new specialist. Marina then finishes her explain her level up system and tells Borksen that while she's free, again, they'll replace her the moment they find another specialist. Really like this panel too, the intimidating nature of it. Borksen decides to return to her friends, but also thinks about the necessity of gaining power to kind of defend herself and fight back against the Haley. Before leaving, she asks for a tour and wants to meet the rest of her new quote-unquote family. And she mentions she has a purpose now, which I believe is to kind of build up strength to, again, defend herself and her friends, but for all we know, it's left vague enough that there are multiple interpretations, and it could be something else entirely. That said, we do cut to special martial law as it takes place in full force on Tier 3. Benjamin is searching for Lazarus and Zhonglei, who are missing and have likely escaped, and we then find out that Haukenberg, or who we at least assume to be Haukenberg, poisoned him. Benjamin's plan is to wipe out all the princes so his successor, an illegitimate child, can rise to the throne. This is the secret mentioned in 402, or at least I believe it is. Benjamin meets up with Bodabai, Mizaisum, and Kaiser, who will serve as his witnesses as he declares martial law. Mizaisum believes Benjamin is holding the other princes hostage, which is an important line to read because a lot of people thought that when Benjamin said there were four princes left, that four princes were still alive, but it's more likely just four princes he hasn't held hostage. And Benjamin then kind of affirms his health to Bodabai, and Kaiser picks up on his illness for some reason. Kaiser's an enigma. Maybe he just saw similar symptoms as he did with Haukenberg, or maybe he knew about Haukenberg's plan. Regardless, he kind of mentions that he has a final stronghold that he hopes to rely on in Benjamin's last hours. So there are quite a few good panels this chapter, but let's focus on a few specifically. The first here is at the start of the chapter where Morena and Borksen are contrasted, another wonderful use of contrast for togashi by kind of splitting the panel, or a page in two. Reina's background is bloodstained and splotchy, while Borksen's is mostly clear, although, again, with these kind of dark splotches. And the way I read into this is Marina's kind of already committed. She's already fallen into villainy. She's indirectly committed mass violence and killed tons of people. While Borksen is still mostly innocent, mostly clear, but by joining the Haley, she's starting to become corrupted even just a little bit. Now, the topic of Borksen and Morena, I think Morena's expression here is telling. We saw this a little bit at the end of 409, and we do see that Morena is genuinely upset that Borksen cheated. Over the last few chapters, Morena at least has definitely grown fond of Borksen. When, they kissed, of course, but also just kind of opening up about her background and her objectives, and Borksen did display a decent amount of sympathy for Morena. And I almost think that Morena would have preferred it if Borksen said no and just accepted her death instead of cheating the way she did. And there's this kind of sad human expression that kind of, again, makes Morena a more sympathetic character. even if I don't necessarily think Borksen was wrong by not wanting to join her. Something else here that I really like is Togashi does this really well. I've touched on it before, but he kind of portrays ideas or concepts through objects as metaphors, and talking about the idea of the phone being destroyed, Morena, or the ability being destroyed in some way, kind of a blood splatter underneath a cracked phone. Just those images that I love, incredibly creative. And it conveys the idea better than if it was just two bubbles of dialogue, right? On the topic of bubbles of dialogue, Borksen's kind of internal monologue changes a little bit. At the start of the chapter, it's kind of foggy and cloudy, like she's like she's controlled, like she's in control of her words or body. Then by the end of the chapter, it becomes clear and sharp. Now, one could interpret this as her becoming more lucid, while others could interpret this as her falling under Morena's control and not having this kind of murky, foggy doubt anymore. I think it's the former. I think it is showing her determination and her lucidity after the confusion of her decision, but it could go either way. There are three spreads this chapter, which it's great to see from Togashi, displaying martial law in effect. And I think the decision to make them spreads is essential because you want to convey that this is a massive ship-wide event, and instead of containing it within multiple smaller panels, having larger panels convey the scope of it visually to the audience is a great kind of artistic move. Some people have compared these spreads to like chapter 348 maybe, when Steiner goes into the laboratory and sees the calamities. I kind of see it. I don't see it entirely. I see it a little bit, but maybe there's something to be looked at there. Lastly, when Masaisam talks to Benjamin, he of course sees his Nembis over his shoulders. Benjamin knows his Nembis exists, but he can't see it. And I think that's important to think about considering what I'll talk about in a little bit, how Masaisam perceives Benjamin, and how the Nembis almost represents what Benjamin's kind of persona is, while Benjamin's true self is a little bit more complicated than this kind of hulking monster sitting on his shoulders. Before we talk about Benjamin, though, I want to talk a little bit more about Morena, because she has a lot of great stuff in this chapter. First of all, she forces Borksen more or less. She threatens Borksen, and her ability kind of forces Borksen into joining her family. And it's it is interesting to think about, well, are other members of Haley kind of forced into their roles? From what we've seen, they all seem to be pretty content with, killing people and following Marina's orders. And maybe some of them are hiding it. It's hard to tell. But it is worth noting that Morena is forcing people into the family she never had. She had a mom, but they didn't interact at all. And she died very early on in Morena's life. And it is interesting to compare Morena's family that's artificially constructed and forces some members into its group with a Quigoro family, which is constructed in a lot of other ways, like with political dealings or with maybe Unyor or beyond having sons or daughters. And it's like, while I do think the Haley is just as bad as the Quigoro family in a lot of ways, outside of Borksen, their family dynamic seems a lot more healthier than the Quigoro family. So that's just worth comparing Morena's kind of forced, self-indulgent family with that of the Quigoro family. Something interesting to talk about with Morena's ability is that by infecting people like Borksen, she's kind of having them share her trauma with her, almost like they're stained too. Her trauma and the pain inflicted upon her manifests itself through a disease that she spreads with other people, so she isn't alone in her suffering. And I'm not a psychologist, but I know a lot of it, a lot of trauma response is hoping to control said trauma and have agency, and this could definitely be Reina's way of having agency over her trauma and her horrible upbringing. Now I'm going to go down here, maybe I should have merged the bullet points, but Morena's ability itself is hypocritical too because she enables a cycle of violence, just as her ability, contagion, spreads. Violence begets violence just as illness spreads amongst people. If you commit violence in order to achieve a goal, especially to retaliate against violent people, that violence could spread just like a disease can and create this kind of never-ending cycle. So it isn't. I do think it's worth comparing Morena's ability, the spread of illness in a sense, to how violence usually just creates more violence, and that is somewhat hypocritical of her if she's retaliating against violence by enacting violence against other people. though she is somewhat upfront about her motives primarily being revenge rather than change. And I think her kind of contradictory, paradoxical character is shown very well. Sorry, there's a vacuum in the background. Shown very well here, where she speaks to Borksen kind of like a I mean, she's definitely intimidating here, but she's been speaking to Borksen politely and kindly and smiling and even acting goofy at points, while her mask kind of falls away completely, and we see these dark, empty, kind of evil eyes. I'm going to be honest. I do think these are these give Morena a very evil image, and she's simultaneously again kind of Borksen, but intimidating and controlling, almost like an abusive mother. And she provides freedom to Borksen, but also threatens her by saying, "Yes, we'll kill you as soon as we need to." So there's that kind of contradiction there that I think is present in a lot of her character, a lot of her characterization. I also want to talk about Benjamin. This is a great chapter for him. It's worth noting how quickly he responds to his poisoning. We do skip 30 minutes, so perhaps he had a stronger initial reaction, but it's still impressive how he kind of collects himself after just half an hour, and he's ready to act. It's definitely true to what we know about him. It's worth comparing Benjamin's goals to Haukenberg's. How Benjamin hopes to ensure his legacy through a child, while Haukenberg's goal is to enact long-lasting change. Benjamin's is a bit more self-serving because he wants to have a child who will inherit the throne, while Haukenberg is more society-serving. Haukenberg's literally thrown away his physical body to achieve his goal. And there's this contrast between, do you want to create a legacy for yourself or change for other people? And I think the reveal in 403 that Benjamin and Haukenberg are direct siblings, at least I don't think either of them is Beyond's child, is really, it kind of makes this more poignant. They are these they're two sides of the same coin. They're very similar in their determination, but their goals are also vastly different. And the rivalry between Haukenberg and Benjamin, especially in this batch, I think it's made all the more powerful by the fact they share a mother and a father. Now, I think Mizaisum's interpretation of him, as I mentioned with that panel of the beast hanging over Benjamin's shoulders, um, fits the mold Benjamin has been given. We know that Benjamin is reasonably introspective despite his impulsivity, and he is at times caring, but in Benjamin's final moments, he kind of suits the image society's placed on him as a reckless dictator. I don't blame Zystom for that because Benjamin's actions definitely support that idea, but it's tragic that only a few people probably know what Benjamin is really like, the kind of complexities of his character. It is also interesting that Benjamin seems to be waiting to find every prince before executing the other ones. Maybe he just wants to be thorough or get it done with quickly, but a more sympathetic reading of his character may suggest he's procrastinating on killing his siblings, especially younger ones like Fugetsu, who we saw him pity in chapter 402, or Global, for example. It could just be a tactical move, but it could also be if you view Benjamin as this human and sympathetic character, he's putting off killing these younger family members as long as possible, maybe even doing it right before he dies. Oh yeah, and I do like, and of course, it is worth mentioning that in 403 we saw this baby crib, and I think I mentioned in the video, but I know a lot of people did mention it, and there was some speculation that this was Benjamin's child, and well, they turned out to be right. This is another great example of Togashi foreshadowing a plot element just in the background of a character talking. Now, let's talk about the hiatus a little bit. Well, let's talk about the next chapter first. The chapter preview reads, as a plan takes place with special martial law declared aboard the ship, how will the princes respond? It's This preview implies that we'll see the other princes react or either react or go back in time. I'm almost certain we'll see a flashback leading up to martial law. There are a lot of events we need to cover, like the funeral procession or Kurapika's lesson with the target from the Have-Nots, it being targeted by the Have-Nots. And we might not see a flashback in 411, since the preview does imply we'll see the prince's immediate reactions, but we'll likely see some flashback and it will likely be multiple chapters. Let's talk about Kaiser's plan or his stronghold. I think it's likely what he mentioned to Steiner, that being the kind of button to shut down the Judicial Bureau. He might hide out there with Fugetsu or whoever he's working with or for, or maybe whoever he's working with is in the Bureau, and even if Kaiser can't hide out there, he wants to protect whoever that person might be. Again, four princes left likely implies that there are four princes not to be detained, not four princes left alive. And if I were to assume who they are, we know Luzurus and Zhonglei are two of them, though I do think it's possible that Luzurus could be dead due to Melody's plan, and that's maybe why he's missing. But regardless, we know Luzurus and Zhonglei are missing. And as for the rest, I could see Wobo escaping with the Zhonglei, Sridnik escaping somehow, since I feel Benjamin wouldn't hesitate to kill him. His internal monologue does seem to imply Sridnik is still alive, and maybe even on the loose. And maybe Benjamin would consider Miriam missing due to his Nembeast nature to kind of help him disappear. We also don't know if Helkenberg is alive or not. I really hope so because he's my favorite prince. But if he was the one who attacked Benjamin, which seems to be the case, then it's possible Benjamin could have killed him in retaliation. Or maybe Helkenberg escaped, and I'll be a lot happier if that happens. But we'll see Helkenberg's fate in the future. Now about the hiatus, again, as I mentioned last video, I don't know how long it'll be. Hopefully a few months because I know Togashi's finished storyboarding chapters 410 to 420, and maybe it's just up to the assistants to finish inking. But I don't want to. I would say optimistically 3 or 6 months, but it could be longer than a year. It's very hard to tell sometimes. But again, I think it's worth appreciating what we got this batch rather than worrying about when we'll see chapters again. As for my videos, I'll be uploading a video next week recapping the batch and kind of giving my feelings and reviewing the chapters and who I think maybe are the MVPs of the batch. So that should be hopefully a fun video and hopefully help you guys wrap your heads around what exactly happened in these last 10 chapters. And then on my community tab, I will have another poll open that I'll talk about in said video, kind of about your favorite chapter of this batch. Let's see what chapter is the most popular among my viewers, and hey, hopefully it'll be a chapter I really like as well. Well, I like all the chapters, but one of my favorites. But that being said, thank you for watching this video. Thanks for the batch. Well, thanks for watching me with this batch. And I think this is a very strong batch. I'm happy with it. And I'll talk more about it next week. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Bye bye.